So I've gone ahead and I've created a blank project. It contains absolutely nothing, and what we're going to do today is we're going to set up the input manager. Now the input manager is built into Unity. You can use your own input manager. There's various ones in the asset store, but I'm just going to use the built-in one for Unity. And we're going to tweak the values in there so that we have the key set up for the two players that we want. Now we want player 1 to use the left hand side of the keyboard, and we want player 2 to use the right hand side of the keyboard. So the key layout should look like this, and I'm going to overlay. You're not going to see me waving around here, but you can see here from the overlay that this is the sort of the layout that we want for the players. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set up that layout in this video. Okay, so you go to Edit and Project Settings and then Input, and that gives us our inspector. I'll just make the inspector bigger. And you see that we have a whole bunch of default ones in here to start off with. We're not interested really in any of these, so I'm just going to go into here and then type in 1. So this is going to give us our horizontal, but again, it's not really the horizontal we want. We want player 1 rotation. So we want player 1 rotate, and the negative button is going to be the Z button, and the positive button is going to be the X button. So our Z, when the user presses the player 1 presses the Z, then we're going to rotate counterclockwise, and when they press X, they're going to rotate clockwise. I'm going to get rid of these here, and this is a key or mouse button, and we are going to have, it's just a key or mouse button, so that's us, we're fine there. So that's player 1 rotation. So we want to add another button here, so we'll type in 2. So this adds another button here. Now you see that it just copies the previous one. So this is going to be player 1 forward, and the player buttons forward is, well, we don't have a negative button for that, but we just have a positive button, and so their forward button is Q. And now I'm going to add the player 1 fire button, which is going to be the letter A on the keyboard. And that's all the controls that we have set up for player 1. Now we're going to duplicate these for player 2. So we're going to have a total of 6 so far. So you see that we have copies here, fire 1, fire 1, fire 1. So we start off at the third one here because we have our player 1 rotate, our player 1 forward, and our player 1 fire. So our player 2 fire is going to be the single quote button. So I'm going to put single quote button in there because it's just positive fire. That's all it is. The next one is the next one we want to change is our rotation for player 2. So our player 2 rotate. Now I'm taking care to make sure I'm spelling this the same way. So our negative button is going to be the full stop key, and our positive button is going to be the / key. Okay. And then our last one is our forward for player 2. And that is going to be the close square brace. And that's it. That's as we have our 3 inputs here. Now we're probably going to add more as we go along, but it's a good idea when you first set up your game is to sort of know what the movement's going to be like. And this really will help you later on, because you want to get rid of all the default ones that Unity puts in there. Pardon me. As great as they are, they kind of clutter up the project as you go. So sit down with a pen, a paper. Always carry one of these things around here, notepad. They're super handy, and the great thing is about notepads is they're very, very cheap, and you can work out an idea on here for almost next to nothing, and it doesn't cost a thing. So yeah, it's perfect. Let's write a script that tests the theory. So let's we just want to write a debug script so that we can make sure that this is working the way that we think it's going to work. So I'm going to go create a folder here called scripts, and I'm going to create another folder called debug just to keep things in here, and I'm going to create a C# script called input debugger. And then I'm going to create a empty game object here, and I'm going to call it input debugger. And I'm just going to drag and drop this script onto my new empty game object. So now it's not an empty game object, it now contains an input debugger. And I'm going to save my scene. So my scene is going to be saved. I'm going to call this debug input. So I'm never going to use this scene. I just want to, I'm going to use it now to test it obviously, but I'm never going to use it in production. I just want to make sure everything's running okay. So double click input debugger, and that will fire up Visual Studio. So now Visual Studio is all fired up and ready to go. Date. So I'm just going to create an update method, and going back to here, where are we? Input, project settings, input. So we have player 1 rotate, player 1 forward, player 1 fire, player 2 rotate, player 2 forward, player 2 fire. So we just got player 1 rotate, player 1 forward, player 1 fire. Okay, so if get button down forward, and all I'm doing here is I just want to add code to check to see if the button is pressed down, and if the button is pressed down, then we're going to output something here. So the way you do that is you specify the name of the input that you want to use. So you'll see that player 1 forward here is spelled exactly the same way as this player 1 forward is, because they're case sensitive. So now player 1 rotation is not going to work that way, so I'm going to just leave that for just now. Get button down, player 2 forward, player 2 forward, if get button down, player 2 fire. And you notice that get button down returns a Boolean value, so we don't need to check anything else, we just need to put it inside the if statement. I mean, we can do true, we can do that, we can do equals equals true, but it's redundant, we don't need to do that. I'm going to get rid of collections as well because we don't need that. And I think that's all the debug we need. Okay, so far, so good. If I open up my console window here and I press Q, you'll see that player 1 forward is indeed works. Press A, and player 1 fireworks. Now let's try that with player 2. Player 2 works, and player 2 works for fire. So everything looks good so far. Now I mentioned that rotation is slightly different. Now the reason why rotation is slightly different is because we have a negative button and a positive button. So I'm instead going to do, if, actually I'm going to do float delta, and then I'm going to do get axis. So input.get axis, and it is player 1 rotate. If delta is not equal to 0, in other words there's a change. So delta is going to, because it's a binary condition that either the key is pressed or the key isn't pressed. I don't need to check for any nuances in there. I just need to check to see if it's not 0. So if it's not 0, if I press the positive key X, then that means that delta is going to contain 1. And if I press Z, which is the negative key, this is for player 1, then I'm going to get delta equal to -1. So debug.log and I'm just going to output the delta there. And of course I'm just going to copy and paste that for player 2. And just change 2. There you go. So I just added 2 to all of these things. So going back to the code now. And we run this again. If I press Z, then you see that delta is -1. There's a bit of a bounce there. I suppose we can test that as well. I think that might be to do with the sensitivity in here. And if I press X, then I get +1. And if I press full stop, I should get delta 2 to be -1. And delta 2 should be +1 there as well. I think it's to do with the gravity. If I change the gravity to 0, I think that will just give us yeah, changing gravity to 0 is a bad idea. Let's change it to something heavier. So if we change it to something heavier, then that means that it's going to bounce back quicker. Which is what it did. So yeah, so we might have to play with these with the gravity value. So yeah, there you go. And speed in units per second, that the output value falls towards neutral when the device is at rest. So yeah, I mean, well, okay, what do we have it as for our rotation here? Player 2 rotate. You know what? Let's just leave it at 3, because it might be quite nice to when you rotate, you have a little bit of a kind of momentum onto it. So let's just leave it at that. Yeah, I think we're done here for the input. So yeah, so that's us. We've got our input set up. We'll probably add another couple of inputs here for when you want to accept a dialog box, or you want to move on to a new map, or that kind of thing. But I think we're done for input here. We've got everything up and running. We've got the player 1 and the player 2 inputs set up. So yeah, I think we're good to go. So that's the input keys set up. Everything seems to be working fine now. I'm going to leave the rotation. We were talking about the gravity there. We're going to leave the rotation just now. It'll be fine. It's gonna tend back to 0 after a while. I kind of like the idea of having a rotation that's got a little bit of momentum to it, as I mentioned in the main body of the video there. So yeah, we're going to leave it. So we have our 6 inputs set up. Player 1 rotation, player 1 forward, player 1 fire, player 2 rotation, player 2 forward, and player 2 fire. So we are good to create our next test scene, and our next test scene will actually be moving an object in real time. So hope to catch you next time. Thank you very much, as always, for watching. Your viewership is appreciated. I know everybody's time is important, so thank you, and I'll catch you next time.